But you can't be an echo. You have to have a unique voice. You have to have something that is value add in the way you synthesize, in the way you translate, in the way you apply, in the way you've taken something and made it into a tool. You have to really look for the value add, and knowledge is not commercializable. Knowledge is not a value add. A value add is how this can be applied for use in the world.
I'm so excited for today's dream speaker guest that we have and an incredible conversation. This conversation is so rich. It's with the gorgeous Cy Wakeman from Cabo, Mexico. Cy is the founder of Reality-Based Leadership. And if you have anything to do with corporate, workplace culture, organization health, organizational psychology, then I highly recommend, if you haven't come across Cy, head across to her website, Reality-Based Leadership, to really understand the power of this woman. Cy is the best-selling author of 4 books. She was voted amongst the top 100 leadership experts on X, previously Twitter, not for 1 year, but for 7 years running. I met Cy at an event at the NSA Influence Conference in 2014 in Denver, Colorado. We had a conversation at an evening event that just blew my mind. Not because she was so spectacular or told me all about what she did, but just the quiet certainty that she has, the insane curiosity that she has for other people, and the glimpse that I got of the work that she does. Cy is a certified speaking professional. And at that same conference that I was at in August 2024, Cy was inducted into the American Speakers Hall of Fame. That is an incredible achievement for anybody. But most importantly, Cy is a beautiful, soulful human being whose work is leaving an indelible mark on the world. And this is one of those conversations I am betting you're going to return to again and again. Cy Wakeman, welcome to Speaker Driven Business Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. It sounds like such a fantastic thing for emerging speakers to tune into. As in, I wish I had that when I was emerging.
Yeah, well, I do get pushback sometimes from the experts around me saying you're teaching too much and you're showing too much. It's like, no, but we need to know when we're starting out. It's that resource like you that I wish I had. So I'm so grateful for your time today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Glad to give back.
Yeah, now, Cy, I met you in 2024, but for a lot of our audience, and the audience is split pretty evenly across the US, Australia, and Europe. Who is Cy Wakeman and what is she actually famous for?
Well, what I'm famous for and who I am might be a little different. I am an odd combo. I'm an introvert who accidentally became a speaker. So what I'm known for very much is about loving nature and hiking and leading people on experiential journeys. And but what I'm famous for is many years ago was able to quantify the amount of time involved in drama in the workplace. And it was a bit of an accidental discovery that led to kind of an excellent career. But that research really spurred us thinking about, is what we're teaching in leadership evidence-based, accurate, and is it solving for the issues we want to solve for? Is it a solution that would actually work or one that leaders would actually use? And so with that discovery that the average person spends 2.5 hours a day in drama, time needlessly suffering based on story, not reality, energy that takes away from results and their well-being. If that is waste, how do we help people eliminate that waste? And like with any waste, it's all about improving processes. And since drama is emotional waste, it's about improving mental processes. And that was right up my alley because I started out life as a therapist, as a social worker.
Okay, so there's a couple of things I'd love to unpack there, just full stop, because it's so interesting. And I think when I first met you and you said, I'm a drama researcher in the workplace, it immediately got my attention because of my background, industrial relations and HR and people and organizational psychology. But what I love, there's a couple of things that I'd love to unpack a little bit more. And the first is, as soon as we hit your website, very quickly you find a statement, drama is emotional waste, right? And so what I love about that is the strength and the power in that. But you just said the research was almost accidental. What led you into unpacking this and researching this? And what was the research you did originally?
So the research I was involved in was for my master's degree, and I was a hospital administrator. So I'd been a social worker and I promoted into leadership. I was getting my master's in hospital administration, and it was my last project, and it was in the industrial work. We were looking at basically a time study and how to make things more efficient. And I had asked the physicians I was managing in the clinic to move to online electronic medical record. And their key objections were it will slow us down. We won't be able to see as many patients. The emergency rooms will be overrun because we saw less patients because you're making us type into a computer. And I definitely didn't want to impact access to healthcare if that was truly an outcome. So I thought, I'll study it. I had a baseline of how much time they spent documenting because they would talk into a microphone or like a little like recorder, and then we would pay by
The old
minute
dictaphones.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, to get it transcribed. So I knew by minute how much time they documented. So I thought, no problem. I will take physicians and I will first get rid of any corruption of my data. They must know how to keyboard. They must be, fluent. And I would put an observer in their room, and they would document how much time the physician spent with the patient and how much time they spent on the keyboard. We would compare that to our baseline. I would graduate. So I hired my observers. I got the research approved as my project. And within the first hour, the researchers called me and they said, Cy, we need a third column. And I just wanted to graduate. I was like, no, I have
Just let me finish.
2 columns. No, 2 columns. Time with patient, time on keyboard. And they said, Cy, you are going to miss out on a fantastic observation. I go, fine, what would you put in the third column? And they said, time that the physician spends complaining about the keyboard or the patient. Like arguing with
Wow.
reality and I said, oh
And they
my
saw that in the
gosh,
first hour.
in the first hour,
Oh, that's
because
extraordinary.
between every appointment, they spent
Yeah.
5 minutes with the patient, 2 minutes documenting, and then 5 to 10 minutes talking to the nurse about how they hated me and the patient. And I thought, that's remarkable. So it came out to be about 2.5 hours a day of their work. And I submitted my work, and it was really received with a lot of, they're like, oh my gosh, you have just discovered something. No one's been able to like quantify, this element. And I thought, well, maybe it's just physicians that are big whiners. Maybe this is generalized to other populations. Maybe they're burnt out. Who knows? And so I took it out of my clinic. I did it with nurses, financial professionals, administrators. It was a constant human condition that averaged around 2.5 hours a day. Even top performers, 2.5 hours a day. And
Wow.
I became so fascinated with that because that's waste. It's energy taken away from results or our own well-being. And I thought I could help so many people if I could find the sources of that waste and then look at what we teach people in leadership to see if what we're teaching them will diffuse trauma or actually increase trauma. And I was able to source it down to 5 sources through more research and take a look at what we were teaching people. And I found that many of the traditional leadership philosophies actually fueled drama and did not diffuse it. While we focused on engagement, we over-rotated and focused little on accountability. And engagement without accountability led to entitlement and so many things. It's fed 30 years of research, that one discovery.
What is the thing when you were first like in this path in that first couple of years when you went, I'll take this to other industries, and that first couple of years when you identified the sources and saw the consistency? What is it that really got your heart, that lit you up with this?
What lit me up with this is that I myself really believe suffering was optional. I was involved in a lot of universal principles of don't believe your own thinking, My therapy background was all about use good mental processes, understand that multiple things can be true at the same time. Like if you're suffering, check your thinking. Pain's inevitable, but suffering's optional. So when this opened up to me, I thought, this is the moment I have been prepared for by the universe. Like, I know the remedy to this. I know a lot about this. And in the workplace, there's little interest in it because there wasn't ROI and no one had quantified. And that so many of the leadership philosophies out there back in the day I started were not evidence-based. And evidence-based to us in healthcare are that it's research-based, it's validated, it's peer-reviewed. It was just somebody saying, I think it's good to do this with your people. And a lot of that as a therapist hit me right in the gut, as that sounds not so good. But there really wasn't evidence to question it. So an example, I was told when I was a leader, keep an open door. And I'm like, what? And they're like, I thought that sounds boundaryless. Like even my clients who were suicidal, if it was after hours, needed to call the hotline. Like I could not be available to my people. Like I had family. Like it just sounded not appropriate. And so as I looked at what people were prescribing, I'm like, wait a minute, why don't we keep an open door, but require people who come through our door to have a mental process that they've already used to reflect on so that our time isn't gossiping or hearsay or things that never happened, or that our time is, I've really looked at what the issue is and what the background is. I've fact-checked and used scientific thinking, and here are some of my recommendations, because people bring us unprocessed work. And we spend 45 minutes. I did a research study. The average, hey, do you have a minute meeting lasted 45 minutes in length. Typical conversation, things that never happened, no one checked. Things that never would happen, anxiety and worry. Things that hearsay. And then it was unprocessed. So I, as a leader, would process it. I'd go, I doubt that happens. I'll go check the facts. I have a meeting at 2. I'll take care of it. So I didn't grow my people. I taught them they're victims, bring it to me. And the typical conclusion was, please don't do anything. I just wanted you to know. And I'm thinking the average leader spends 45 minutes, 10 times a day on nonsense. And that's called a good leader. They were available. And I'm like, my door is open to you. Bring processed work. I will love you up and I will call you up. And I will require of you that you work through this towards solution. So I started to look at what was being taught and the evidence around that. And yeah.
I'm really leaning into this because as a young manager, I was taught the same. And one of my things I got very used to was someone would knock on my door and they'd say, have you got a minute? And I would actually say to them, actually, can you come back in 20 minutes? Because right now I'm focused on this and I can't give you my attention. And then inadvertently what that did was when they went away, it usually diffused. So by the time they came back, it would be shorter and briefer. So it was very accidental. So to actually hear that from you
did it, yeah.
It's like, it was like literally because I couldn't switch focus fast enough. Like they would be at my door needing to download. And I would be like, but I'm focused over here and I can't actually switch gears to give you the attention you need. And then that would create the circuit breaker that they would actually go away and come with something different. So to hear you actually say that is quite extraordinary. At what point did it really gain traction?
So, and this is when I talk to a lot of people who want to be speakers. They're like, I want to speak. And that to me is not a useful goal. Speaking is a way, one venue, whether it's in person or online, it's an avenue to give help. It's an avenue to solve problems. And so a lot of people come to me and I'm like, I want to be a speaker. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is your one thing that you have that people need to know about that will change their lives? And they're like, well, no, I'm really good at speaking. I want to be a speaker. And I'm like, it's got to be a discovery. And in today's world, it's got to be evidence-based. And you have to be very careful that you're not just repeating unresearched things. We used to joke, I'm old, so The Man in the Mirror. When I went into public speaking, every speaker read The Man in the Mirror, this poem. And I was always horrified as a female therapist who didn't identify as male It was very patriarchal. Pick yourselves up by the bootstraps. Is non-collaborative. You have everything you need, to like be successful. I'm like, there's not one ounce of
No.
research that supports this type of resiliency. This is a recipe for doom. If you're going to recommend, look yourself in the mirror, call yourself up, work alone in exclusion of others, like with no curiosity and no compassion. And I'm just like, even calling yourself up, I'm like, you're not a self-help project. Like, you're a perfectly formed human being. So there were just so many things that I say. One, have some discovery, or be exquisite at translating other people's discoveries. You don't have to have your original.
I really like that, because one of the things I'm smiling here because we're getting into a big conversation about the thought leadership bubble and movement and things that it's creating with a speaking perspective. But what I really love about that, as well as what you just said about be really good at translating, because some people are actually great synthesizers of the information out there, and they can distill what comes through. And I think moving forward, that's going to be as valuable as discovery. What do you think with that?
I absolutely agree that so some of the people who have original thought might be able to command some greater fees, but everybody can make a living at being an exquisite translator. And translator is either you can translate other people's discovery, or you are amazing in application. Maybe you are an expert in process improvement in manufacturing, and so you take my work and lots of other people's work to talk about emotional waste and Sigma's discoveries. So I think there's both out there, but you can't be an echo. You have to have a unique voice. You have to have something that is value add in the way you synthesize, in the way you translate, in the way you apply, in the way you've taken something and made it into a tool. You have to really look for the value add, and knowledge is not commercializable. Knowledge is not a value add. A value add is how this can be applied for use in the world. And so that's just what I would say on that there's room for experts, and there's room for translators, and there's room for appliers. And be very clear about who you are, because there's room for everybody. But don't tell somebody you're an expert if you're an expert application person.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, because it's actually understanding the style. One of the things I've come to understand with working with the emerging speakers is a lot of people don't make it in our world who make it in other trainers' worlds. But it's because if you don't have your own lived or worked experience, I'm not going to help you. Right. So the process that we use to unpack your lived and worked experience, if it's just a thought bubble or thought leadership, then actually you can't get through our process, because I need to know that it's something that you own. And I don't care how rough it is. I just need to know that it's something that you own. So when you actually first went into speaking, how did that happen, and why did you go there?
So for me, it was very organic. I play, I'm not sure I'm great for this podcast because I'm such a reluctant speaker. So for me, it was organic. I worked in healthcare, and I made a name for myself by producing results. And in healthcare in the United States, at least, and I'm sure everywhere, but I just know the US, we share our outcomes. Data is published. So what this oncology unit did in this city, what their length of stay was, what their outcome rate, what their readmissions were, all of that's out there. And I would go in, and within a year was able to dramatically change results. So in healthcare, you get invited to speak at conferences, not as the keynoter, but on a panel. And they're saying, knowledge share with us. What is your process for being able to come into a unit and do such turnarounds? Which was a good question for me, because I did a lot of it like you did, unconsciously, right? I was unconsciously competent. So I had to really reflect and say, what is it that I do? And get consciously competent, really break it down to the essence. And I see a lot of emergent speakers, it's like accountability is good. Do accountability. They're not breaking it down to the essence. I ask for commitment. I focus on resilience, and that's really what also is valuable. So I was asked to speak and on panels, and it just was a viral thing. People felt so much, they felt the message resonated with them. And they would come up to me afterwards and they're like, that's counterintuitive. I never thought about it that way. That really made me, see some things differently. And so in the beginning, it wasn't paid. It was really organic. It was pretty viral. I started, to speak and did, some writing and things with the effort of helping people not to have a speaking business. And that's where I think people's motives get a little upended. And then we didn't have training budgets. And so I would go to the hospital an hour away. They would come to mine. We would call us external speakers. And it really was, I was just really willing to focus on adding value rather than making money. In the beginning, I was honing my message. I was getting a lot of time under my belt in front of people, even started to learn like what jokes landed, how I described a model, what really resonated, what didn't. And so I was really willing to not be transactional and really focus on transformational work, trusting that what I put out in the universe, if it was helpful, I would be rewarded. And I think a lot of people want to get the speaking gig rather than focuses on what's the value proposition I offer. And it's not transactional. Put it out in the world as you are sought after, charge what you're worth, and follow that lead. But you can't pre-orchestrate that. There's a push and pull.
And this is interesting. Like you said, I'm not sure I'm the perfect candidate. So, and some of our audience already know this, but I actually don't like speaking, right? So I don't
like it when
speaking.
I'm speaking, but
I'm
nervous before,
but the lead in,
and I'm a wreck afterwards.
And in the morning, even when it's my own event, like my husband will tell you, and my audience know this, I will say to him, you need to cancel your event. And he'll say, honey, it's your event. It's like, we can't do that. But it's because of the lead in, but it's also because I come from a similar background. So my initial speaking was accidental. I actually resisted it. I trained my teams to speak so I wouldn't have to. So I was very good at training others to go out and speak for our business and when we were asked to speak and things like that. So I was really good at training them. And then I got caught in the crosshairs one day and I had to speak. And so then, and it was the same thing. It went viral. It was organic. People demanded it. People wanted it. It opened up things. So I just kept doing it. And about 4 years later, I was opening a conference so I partnered with an association. And I was opening a conference for them. And in the green room, someone said to me, oh, you're an opening keynote speaker. What are you getting paid? And I was like, and actually I was an industrial relations negotiator. So inside I was like, what do you mean getting paid? And outside I was like, well, I don't reveal my fees because I was a negotiator.
Nice.
So I knew. And so, but I went straight to the organizer and I said, apparently people get paid for the opening keynote. She goes, yeah, actually. And I'm like, why am I not getting paid? She said, well, we just didn't think of it and you didn't ask. She said, we'll pay you. So it wasn't ever a thing. And even then, most of my speaking was simply to give value because every time I spoke, our business grew, right? And so it took a long time for me to understand that this was actually a professional career. So what I love about that is a synergy with yourself. It was just about adding value. It was just about actually growing business.
When you can say, I confidently now add value, then charge what you're worth. And people in the speaking industry, once you get to that point, people are like, how do you control your schedule? And I'm like, well, if you're too busy, raise your fee. The market will continue to tell you what fee you belong into. But I really believe in mind, heart first, and the rest will follow, that there's some trust in that process.
What's been that? Because obviously, so then you did that, how you started was within the hospital environment, the healthcare environment. When did you actually bring it into growing the work that you did in drama research?
So the drama research work all tied into how I was leading my teens unconsciously. And then I consciously got it conscious and I started researching different parts to make sure that the hypothesis I had was ruled out in the evidence. And so I had a lab of different hospitals and teams I was working with, and we were able to do a lot of metrics and measured psych metrics like accountability levels and locus of control. I got to play. So I would take on units, I would do pre and post tests. So I think speakers need to do this, have an area of expertise, but always have a research agenda. Always have something you're working on next or deeper to bring. And that keeps your clients coming back. as well. So it happened pretty quickly. I got pregnant. So right as I was doing a lot of this and getting a lot of acclaim, I was asked to teach at a community college, some assertiveness training. I took that because I liked helping people. It was like $15 an hour. Some clients who were from a large corporation were taking that to look for material for their training. They loved my approach. They brought me in to help with that. It was just so iterative. And I was pregnant. I wanted to leave healthcare and I wanted a maternity leave or a sabbatical, and both were turned down. That was my first baby was in 91. And in the United States, we had 6 weeks maternity leave, and he was a very, very sick kid. And so I went to my boss. I'm like, can I take a leave? No. Can I consult with you? No. And then I had other leads that people were like, will you come do a class for us? Or will you come talk to our health system? And so for me, again, I can't say it was so planned. It was more out of necessity. And I said, at least for a year, I'll reapply for my job. But at least for a year, I am going to quit. And then I'll just do some of these things for other systems. And immediately they said, well, we need that done for our system. I'm like, well, that's something I'd love to say and do that for your system. But there's no place in payroll for me. You full-time administrators weren't part-time. They didn't pay you gig, but they paid consultants. So I said, well, I'll do that for you, and started charging him my fee. And the CEO was horrified when he found out I was leaving. And I'm like, well, I'll come back as a consultant. He gave me a retained contract of 20 hours.
Perfect.
And I'm like,
foundation contract. Let's go.
Yeah, foundation contract. And then my boss was kind of mean about it. He's like, if you leave here, you're going to make exactly what you're worth. And I said, I'm counting on that because I was underpaid. And so my first year out, and I hate telling this to speakers who struggle, my first year out, but you teach this, I made more money, had more tax write-offs and more freedom. I worked harder than I've ever worked, but I had more freedom than I've ever had. And it just turned out really, really well. And then things, really spread like wildfire after that. So not that I didn't have hard times. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, I just showed up and things happen. But I think it was Oprah Winfrey said, luck is when opportunity meets preparedness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think, one of the things I say to people, and I pulled someone up yesterday, a client yesterday, they're like, I've been incredibly lucky. I'm like, no, you've got incredible skills that you've built. So it feels like I guess, because it all happened very quickly in the first year of speaking and consulting, but you had this whole career and the research and the robustness behind it. And that's one of the things I say to people all the time: to stand on the shoulders of your previous career, stand on the shoulders of what you've done before, because it's not accidental. None of it's accidental. What I'd love to explore before we get deep into the speaking side of it, but I'd just like to touch on one thing. Is there anything that really stands out from the drama research work, either from a client perspective or what you discovered in research? Is there something that really stands out that really, I don't know, has your heart, is the thing that, you're proud of? Or I think pride is the wrong word, but it really has your heart, that really stands out as something where a difference was made that was quite dramatic?
Gosh, I have been in the business so long. I get the most incredible emails and conversations afterwards. And so I'm trying to think of a single one because I've had so many. But I would tell you, I work a lot with the Center for Disease Control in the United States, a lot of the Federal Drug Administration and healthcare entities, that when I would hear National Institute of Health, they're my gods. And then when I actually was given security clearance and I stepped on campus of NIH, I was so overwhelmed with I cannot believe this is happening to me, that I get to help these premier organizations respond to world health crises. And so probably one of my proudest moments, and I don't want anyone to imply politics into this, but in the United States, when the CDC was throttled a bit by our administration about not responding in the way we thought was evidence-based to a world health epidemic, there were many scientists devastated. And they're like, we will have millions of people die. This is unnecessary. This shouldn't be politicized. And because I had worked with them, they called me up because they were really what we call toggled down. They were into story. They couldn't see any place of impact. They were really lost. And I was able to bring them back to the principles we had learned, which is stop arguing with reality. That's the argument you'll lose 100% of the time. Meet reality as it is. You don't need to tolerate it, but you're not going to impact it by saying they should do something and leadership, shouldn't be telling us this. And, this is sick and wrong. And then I said, think about what you want to create and find that place between arguing with reality and wishing for a different future. That's your place of impact. And your next choices, your next right action, manage your energy away from why we can't to how we could. And from that group was able to start picking up and not feeling defeated and to start saying, we can educate emergency room physicians. We can get information sharing for how we're treating this epidemic. We can vaccinate the willing. And so for me, that was a proud moment that made me realize that I had gone from speaker to partner of people doing very important work in the world. And that's happened to me in a lot of breakthrough. I got to work with NASA and the team that replaced the Hubble telescope. Like, I've gotten to work true partnership to help people to tap into higher consciousness to create different worlds. And I was a support person in that. And so I just feel really good to have that legacy.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. One of the things that kind of bubbles up for me with that is the partnerships, which are extraordinary. The research that you've done, and it's been 30 years you've been doing it for now, is really deep. Do you think being able to move into those partnerships would have happened if you hadn't built your profile, if people didn't know who you were? Because a lot of people have extraordinary work, like your research, but they don't actually take the public pathway.
And that's the next piece, is that if you have this thing of value, you have to learn the business. This, when I joke and say, I've been very fortunate, very lucky, I'm very grateful that I studied the business. In the States, I'm a member of the National Speakers Association. There's the International, Federation. Like, you have to know the business and don't leave it up to your own instinct. There are standards. There are people who are willing to share exactly how to build a business. You have to invest in yourself, and you have to resist the urge to make all the mistakes everybody keeps telling you don't make. Like, so I do communication in the early days. I'm like, I speak on anything. And I had a mentor. She's like, stop abandoning yourself. You only speak on drama. And I was like, but I could speak on anything. She's like, yes, you could. See many emergent speakers worry about what's in it for them. And I have a mindset of abundance. I am like, my aim is yes. And if it doesn't violate my own values or my well-being, or if it isn't overgiving, like, I will help and trust that the universe does the math. And I see a lot of people, I even watch their contracts going in. They're very protective. Like, I will only speak 90 minutes. If it goes 1 minute over, you do this. And I will only arrive 6 hours before it. And I'm like, that's your contract, but that's not a partnership contract. And that's controversial. But I was giving a very highly paid keynote. I only really keynote now at this age of my career. At full price, highly paid, opening and closing. And a breakout speaker didn't show up. And I'm like, I will do your breakout. And they're like, what? We have no money. I go, that's just part of our partnership. You're in a bind. I will do a breakout. I had 9 out of 10 speakers go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. And you just showed them you're willing to do this. And I just said, you got to trust yourself in the moment. I had a partner in need. And partnership is about, if you're losing sleep, I helped. And I don't know that in the world that got me anything. I know that it helped make an event amazing. And I think my reputation out there very much is Cy's team is drama-free and easy to work with. That doesn't mean we don't have boundaries, but like, we will partner with you to make sure that your event's amazing. And sometimes that's me staying 2 hours for a book signing. Sometimes that it means a lot of things. So I think people get really transactional, and I would just say resist the urge to
stay away from that.
Yeah, stay away from that.
Yeah, I love that. Is it 4 books at the moment? You've published 4 books just when you said book signing then?
Yes, so I have 4 books. I had a couple books before that. I was just like chapter contributor in, but 4 books that I wrote and published. Yeah.
So I'm super curious because we've had people like Elizabeth McCormick and David Averin and people like that on the podcast. Super curious. What's your view on books and how essential is it and what difference did it make? 3 questions.
Okay. So times are different today than when I made my decision. So if you're an emerging speaker, quit listening to people who published books 20 years ago because the world's completely different. So I didn't set out to write a book. I got a call from an agent who read. So Fast Company wanted bloggers back in the 80s. 1,000 of us applied. They picked 12. I was a Midwesterner, 40-year-old. I was probably, some people call me a diversity hire, but really counterintuitive stuff. Being willing to do that for free, just for publicity. An agent was reading those blogs, loved it, called me up, said, have you ever thought about writing a book? My first book, I can't remember, it came out 2017, 11 maybe?
Yeah.
I
11,
remember.
wasn't it?
I think so. Is that horrible? And so for him, it was right in front of me. My name is yes. If something stands right in front of me and there's no reason not to, I'm like, sure, I'll do that. I won't do everything, but I'm like, sure. And so I wrote a proposal. He pitched it. We got a yes and an advance in, like 6 weeks. Again, because it was so different from what was on the market. I followed through with every deadline. We published the book, and I won, it's hard to get into royalty position with a traditional publisher. And so I did that with my first book. That led me to an even bigger advance. My publisher had Bright's refusal, did a second book for them, and then walked away from that publisher because their business model changed, and went with a third publisher, or a second publisher, for my third book. Got an even bigger advance. I continually made royalties. My second book was a New York Times bestseller. My third book was not. And that's the interesting story, but that's a mystery how people get on the New York list. I sold enough books, but people were suspicious of how I sold them because so many books went to one address. They thought I was paying people, but that really was, by that point in corporate America, I had corporations ordering 1,000 books. And then the fourth book I wrote during COVID, and it was more of a personal book with the same publisher. Now, by book number 3 or 4, the world had changed. So I did a pro and con of going with a traditional publisher versus a non-traditional publisher. When I first published, traditional publishers gave you credibility. They do nothing to market your book. Absolutely nothing. They make money off of you. You will make $1. They will make $20 off your book. And you will peddle your own books, and they'll be your business card, your calling card. No one ever makes money off of books. And I've sold a lot of books, like a lot. Maybe I made, if my advance was 200,000, I've got that back, but like, that's not my business model. So by the third book, so the first book, everyone said you needed national credibility. You had to be at the traditional publisher. Today, if you ask the average 30-year-old who the publisher was of any book, if they've read a book, they will not know. If I say, do you know Josie Bass? They're like, no. So that model is dead. I did it you did not get keynotes without like a book from a national publisher. That was your calling card. By the third book, I would do pros and cons. The money I would make in going with the publisher and some of the other pros versus if I self-publish. And the final book, if I self-published, I would have made hundreds of thousands of dollars more because I had the platform. I never relied on my publishers for editing. I always paid private editing. The book covers publishers put forward were horrible and not on brand. I always put in my contracts that I would have my own branding people do my own book cover. So what was I getting from national publishers? I would tell you, if I did another book today, I probably would not go with a national publisher unless I got a big advance. I think those days are over. There's a lot of hybrids. I don't even know that running a campaign like a New York Times or Amazon, I think they're distractions. I wouldn't pay somebody extra to run a campaign. So what do I think of books? I think that they're a dying breed. I think that event planners still like them. People buy them but don't read them. So I think that if you're going to invest a lot of time and money, a book should be a compilation of things you wrote for other reasons and an easy summary of your work so that you have a calling card that you can give away. But books, I don't think should be your main goal anymore. I don't plan on writing another one, but I do think you can do great stuff with content and repurposing content. So I'm all about content. Let me do a white paper. Let me do my top 10 YouTube video list for you. Let me do a really great social media presence, because that's where you have to go to where the people are. And so what we did early on after my third book, so 2017, we took a chance with Gary Vaynerchuk. It was a beta program. He picked 10 people and you paid him a lot of money. And that's why I say invest in it. And he would help you do social media, not the algorithm, not how to get placement, content that you repurposed, pillars of content. And that was the number one thing we did that grew our brand in anticipation of that book publishing. Is a
Wow.
hefty investment, but it really taught us how to do content well. And then we did that. We paid videographers to follow me around. We paid hundreds of $1,000s a year for that level of content. We only have like 5 employees, big investment. And we watched the market as the algorithm changed. We no longer controlled who saw all of our content. We were giving content away for free and it wasn't reaching the decision makers. So we pulled back. We do very little social media and now we do newsletter because we own the list. Newsletters were the 80s thing. They're back. And so message in all of this is don't do a book for vanity reasons. When people are like, I published my book and it changed my career, I'm like, show me the evidence. Well, my speaking increased the year my book was published. I'm like, those two may not be correlated. They may be correlated, but they're not causational. And so I just encourage speakers to not focus on these big things of have to haves. If somebody said you have to have this, be very suspicious. Focus on what is my goal. With Vaynerchuk, my goal was to feed my audience so that they would drive me to decision makers. So if I couldn't get to the chief operating officer, nobody wanted to go to the training. I wanted people to say, when the chief operating or the HR human resource officer said something, I wanted them to say, well, if you bring Cy Wakeman in and
will
to push
come.
to the top, because they didn't know social media and they were so used to having to force speakers on people. And we created for a couple of years people asking their leaders to bring me in. But that only lasted a couple of years because then people understood that we're targeting them social media. But I loved feeding my audience after an engagement. We believe in sustainability. We give away so much for free. And I fed my audience. And then we used that to drive to decision makers. And then for 3 years we did that. And then we stopped and we went the newsletter route. And that's why it's important. There's no one way to get there. There is a way working for many today. See if it would work for you. So study the business, study the marketplace, interview people. But my biggest problem with speakers organizations is a lot of people tell you how they did it 37 years ago. It's not relevant today. And a lot of people told me how I should do it, and it wasn't relevant to me. I'm the mother of 4 children. I don't like the hustle environment. I've stepped out of the hustle. My business has grown when I stepped away from all the hustle. You have to do all the stuff. You have to travel all the time. So I decided early on to curate the life I wanted and then to build in alignment to that. But my best advice to people is get very clear about who you are, how you want to help, and then get very healthy. Get healthy in your boundaries so they aren't rigid or fluffy. Get healthy in your mindset so that you're not seeking external validation or you're not an ego. Like grow yourself so that you can calmly walk through the world, offer what you have, and then design a way that works for you.
I love that advice. And we're actually with the collective, which we've mentioned before, we're about to head into planning. So I'm actually going to bring some of that into the questions we frame this with, because, we did a lot of hustle last year and it worked really well for our brand, but we're coming into this year. I'm like, I am not hustle bound. I don't like it. And I don't thrive in it because it takes, and what worries me with emerging speakers is the hustle takes away our creativity, right?
Yeah, it
So there are
does.
certain
Hustle's an
things,
illusion.
yeah, and there are certain things that you have to get done, especially at that breakthrough stage. But it's like, what is the trade-off here? And the trade-off usually is your creativity and your generosity, right? Because when you are in frantic motion, which is what hustle is, you can't be generous to those around you, and you can't be creative, and you can't go into deep thinking work. So it's one of the things that we're bringing into play. So when I met you at the Influence Conference, which is the NSA, National Speakers Association conference in Denver last year, you became an inductee of the Hall of Fame. So as we wrap out this podcast episode, I'd like to, because I remember meeting you one night, and then the next night you're on stage getting inducted. I was like, well, I really liked her, and now I'm really intrigued because I had no idea that you were up for that. How did that feel? And tell us a little bit about what it meant for you on a personal and professional level to be inducted.
Wow. First of all, it was pretty surreal, and I hope I never lose this feeling. I grew up in a farming community. I'm the first educated person out of my family, although many people contribute amazing things in the trades. When people come out to me at Starbucks in the airport and they're like, "Oh my God, are you Cy Wakeman?" Or they go, "Oh my God," I'm always looking around for who they're "oh my Godding" about, because I
Someone
really
over your
am.
shoulder.
Yeah. I'm not saying that to be humble. I'm saying that to say that I like to stay in my own body, in my own lane, and never be fooled about who I am or where I came from. I never want to forget I'm a member of the human race. So when I was asked to be, or they told me I was being inducted, or actually somebody nominated me, it started before that, and then you get inducted. It felt very honoring, very surreal. And I was very clear about, but for the grace of God, go I. I did my best.
Yeah.
And I got so much visible help and invisible help along the way. And so I couldn't stand up there and be like, yeah, I am great. I am good. I did my part. And I also acknowledge that it is on the backs of others. And I don't say that in a derogatory way, but like so many people lifted me up or shared something with me, whether even it was like hard feedback or my staff that have worked with me. And then on the other hand, it was a huge honor because I've been a voice at NSA for getting out of the hustle, for spirituality, for healthy living, for balance, for beyond ego. And so when I came up, I didn't do a lot of the things that other people said, if you don't do this, you'll never make it. And I came up at a time in NSA, in any organization, there's a lot of bias. People didn't even understand how male focused they were, how exclusive they were of people that identified differently, of working moms. Like, I'll never forget, like, some of the advice I would get. They're like, well, just when you're on the road, you have to only be focused about being on the road. And I'm like, do you have children? "Well, my wife is home. My wife is home with them." I'm like, that's the most insane advice you could ever give to a mother. Like, I and I'm sad for you because you're missing out on your children. Like, and so when I stood on stage, it was symbolic to me that a new dawn has broken, because some people said, I can't believe it's taken this long for you to get this. Like, I was an introvert, so I wasn't out there a lot. I helped a lot of people quietly. And what it represented to me, in fact, the song I went on stage was "What Girls Are Players Too," and which is a hip hop song. It's kind of a naughty rap song. Like, I wanted that marked for me, that when I'm true to myself, I think Rilke, the poet, said, when you learn to trust yourself, then you'll know how to live. And so for me, it was validation that there are more than one way to get there, that there are many ways to get there. And that was my job to show people a different way so that they could emulate, they could see something else emulated beyond hustle and deprivation and lack of boundaries and workaholism. And not that many of my colleagues have figured this out too. I'm not critiquing. I'm just saying getting that award was validation that a new day is dawning and that there's a lot of room for a lot of us. And in fact, the market is demanding we give them something other than what they've been getting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a perfect answer because I remember sitting there as you went up, and there were a couple of inductees that night. And your speech, we were almost at the back of the room because we were over from Australia and didn't really know a lot of people. But your speech struck me, and it was that whole there for but for the grace of God go I, and I'm just played my part. And it was the humbleness. And I just again got chills when you were speaking again, because it was one of the most beautifully crafted speeches I've ever heard for an acceptance of that sort of thing, but not because it was exquisite and professional, but because,
Yeah, I was
as you said,
bawling.
it was, yeah, but as you say, it almost was this recognition that it's okay and possible to be against the grain. And you didn't do it in a blustery way. Like, you're not an influencer. You're not like, you know what I mean? Like, it was this rock solid research, an introvert who doesn't like to take the stage, who actually was focused on making a difference and serving others. And that is why I like literally fell in love with you as a person that night. I loved our conversation originally, but I love that. And that's what I wanted to bring through, because so many people in that emerging aspiring stage, who is most of our client, or they're breaking through to the next level, most of our audience is they are getting hit with, as you said, this way of doing things that is old. Even the way of speaking, most speaking coaches are teaching people to speak in ways that don't actually accommodate modern audiences. The storytelling arcs have changed, and it breaks my heart, which is one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing. And so that is why, to me, it felt like a perfect match to bring you in to show that perspective. As we wrap out this particular episode for our audience, what I'd love to know is, for those that are at the start of their journey or frustrated because they keep hitting the wrong advice, what's your final words of wisdom for them as we wrap this episode out?
I think two things. One, you can get really focused on trying to be chosen in your personal life. Like, my kids ask me, like, why'd you marry our dad? I'm like, I don't know. He's a nice guy because he asked me. Like, I never asked me if I wanted to, like, if that's the life I wanted. And I write about that a lot in Life's Messy, Live Happy. My last book was more about my personal lessons. Don't seek to be chosen. Ask yourself to do the choosing. So take all advice in with curiosity, open heart, open mind. Everything that comes to you, take it in, and then ask you if it was meant for you. And don't worry, if it's an important message, it will come back so many times you can't ignore it. There are no mistakes. So some things I ignored early on, I'm like, no, not meant for me. 20 years later, I'm like, gosh, dang, that's super good advice. Yeah. But I'm like, you need to ask you, and take it not intellectually, take it into your heart space and say, does this what does this do to my energy? Does this bring me alive and excite me, or does this fill me with dread? All the wisdom you need is anchored in you. And once you hear the frequency in the external world, it will resonate with you. Focus on the resonance. So many people, even my team, we go to a big conference and I'm like, we are coming away with nothing more to do. Did not go there and get 20 more distractions about, if only you did this, you would grow your, but stop buying things. Stop. Gather ideas. We will put those as methods. We will look at the life we want to create, and then we will look at some of the goals that would measure success there. And then we will look at methods people have presented to us and see if one or two of them make sense to get there. And really keep it simple, avoid distraction, and focus on defining the life you want. Like, for years, I worked a life I needed a vacation from. And when I turned 50 10 years ago, it just dawned on me. I'm like, I'm going to design a life I don't need a vacation from. So I would work hard and then vacation. And once you start curating your own life with boundaries and design and advocacy for yourself and healing your own trauma, and you know what resonates, but emerging speakers doubt themselves because people speak confidently with authority about what worked for them in the past. So I would say thank you. Just like, an older person talks to me about, I should wear t-shirts on podcasts. I should wear St. John's wear. I'm like, thank you. And I'll take my chances. Because I like to be in t-shirts better than St. John's wear.
I love that. Cy Wakeman, thank you so much. It's been an
You're
absolute
so
pleasure.
welcome.
And I
Thanks
know
for having
everyone's going to
me.
love
And
it.
good luck to everybody. It's a fantastic way to make a living.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Cy.
You're welcome.